Well, Merry Christmas, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, and to all the listeners and people watching, and to you.
You know, I really didn't think we'd be here talking.
Oh,
to
ye of
each
little
other.
faith.
No, it wasn't faith about winning. It was, we've known each other a long time. I'm thinking back to January, February of 2013, and of course, the mayor Rob Ford has decided he's first one out of the gate, going to win. Wait till October 27th, and the narrative is who's in, who's out, and obviously I didn't know whether I knew you were thinking about it, and I'm hearing all the buzz and the whispers of people wanting you to run, but I wasn't sure you were going to actually enter this race. Even in February, I remember you and I were at a reception somewhere, and you said I got to decide by the end of the week. I didn't really know what you meant, but you did. But I wasn't sure you were going to.
It wasn't for the faint of heart, in this sense that even when I got in, I was in third place, and this was based on published polls and our own private polling. Lest you think I had private polling saying that I was winning from day one. I was in third place, and I was 25 points behind Olivia Chow. But I had a faith that the kind of skill set that I would bring to the job, which spoke to a kind of calmer, less polarized, I'll call it more professional kind of management of the city's affairs, would have some appeal to people after all the chaos. I had a sense, and I don't mean this in any way to diminish her, but that maybe Olivia Chow, there was more of a sort of a myth that had been built up there about this kind of huge candidate that was this MP, and so on and so on. Right. And that in the end I did have a chance, so I decided to enter, and it was these things are a gamble in politics. They always are, as they are in life. Changing jobs is a gamble, and I took the gamble.
But none of us knew whether this Ford thing was a phenomenon that, despite anybody's credentials like yours or Olivia's or anybody else who may have had the capacity and the ability to serve the city well, could overcome this, because none of us could understand it in the first place.
Well, I understand it probably better than many, because I've been out there and listened to the people talking about why they supported the Fords. But I also understood from the beginning, or at least I had a feeling, that people were saying, you know what, I really don't think in the end we can afford to continue with this, with the sort of the chaos and the reputational damage done to the city, the lack of productivity that was caused by all the sort of the goings on, and that they really would be looking for a change that would be more like somebody like me. And I'm not saying it's me, but somebody like me who is more stable and more down to business and more or less just worry about getting things done, a kind of non-polarizing figure. Because if I hadn't had that confidence, John, I wouldn't have run. I would have said, hey, I mean, I didn't have some particular point to prove by running. I'd run before and lost and won.
Did your experience on radio and what you were hearing from people as callers, in addition to your business colleagues who were urging you to run, did that have a lot to do with your confidence that was rebuilding or not?
It's a very insightful question, because the answer is absolutely yes. I mean, I'd had 4 years where I had the chance and the privilege, and it was fun to listen to people from across Toronto. And when you would listen to them, you would both understand the roots of their frustration that led to the Ford Nation, but you would also understand, I thought, a hunger they had for calming things down. As much as they sort of enjoyed the daily soap opera of what was playing itself out, they also knew, you could tell from when they would talk to you, that they didn't think it was good for the city. They didn't think it was, really creating any results for people that made their lives better. And so that's one of the things that actually did give me the confidence to say, I think there's an opening here, for somebody to come in and provide that kind of calmer thing, while at the same time not abandoning many of the things Mr. Ford was seen as standing for good or, for whether it was fair or unfair. He was seen to be the crusader for taxpayers. People liked that. And I had to sort of convince them, well, with me you can have a calmer, stabler sense of government, but also someone who will mind the pennies, because I know how. But so the talk show helped a lot to allow me to listen.
To take us behind the curtain for a bit, this is a year-ender. We'll look forward before it's over. But again, let's go back to February. Share with us the key moments of decision, because I clearly remember I got a call or an email from Bob Richardson late one Sunday night, after you and I had talked, and you'd said you'd had a certain amount of time to decide, and it was like, we're going tomorrow. I think it was 11 o'clock at night I got this email, and I thought, what the hell? So clearly that decision was made very quickly, out of the gate, and it was Monday, and it was the same day as Karen Stintz. I don't know whether that had anything to do with anything, but tell me, what was that 48 hours like? What was going on?
It was complicated by the fact that I had continued to do the talk show, and that I'd made the promise when I decided to run that I would notify them, because I felt that sense of obligation to get off the air and or let them make that decision about when I should get off the air. And we actually decided, not on the Sunday night at midnight before the next morning, but we decided on the Friday that I would run around that sort of at the end of that week. And I had finished the radio show, so I knew I was never going back on, because I never did.
But they didn't know that.
No. I phoned them on that weekend and said, the time has come, I've decided to run, and not only that, but it's going to happen very, very soon, and I'm not coming back, and so on. And I hadn't decided before that. I mean, I had to have that one last chat, and I left. I was actually down south, and I went to see Barb for the weekend, because she sometimes spends some time there in the winter, and had that final chat with her and said, look, are you ready that I should take this on? And by the way, we'd had the meetings at which she'd been present where they presented this polling saying I was in third place, 25 points behind. And I think she, like a lot of people, looks at politics and says, like, what is with people who get presented with polling, scientific polling, saying you're 25 points behind, you're in third place, you have an almost seemingly unstoppable person in first place, and why would you do this? And I said, well, because I think I can win, and I think there is an opening, as we discussed. And so I came home, and so when you got that call Sunday night, it's because literally, I think we had to make sure I was off the plane coming home that Sunday night, so I was actually physically in Toronto to do what had to be done, but we had decided to go the next day. And Karen Stintz, by the way, had nothing to do with it.
I didn't think so.
She was making 5 different announcements of her candidacy, which is a smart thing to do from the standpoint of media, but we sort of figured any day we announced would be some day she had an announcement, so we just go ahead and do it on the Monday.
Anyway, that's why I thought, I didn't know that we were going to be here, but because I didn't know where you were going to go. But I also know that you'd become disillusioned with politics during your time away. Was there anything that brought you back into it? Or?
Only the thought that you can't give up because you're disillusioned. And I was disillusioned not by the political process, in which I always have believed very strongly. I was disillusioned by the fact that everybody else was losing faith in it, that even some of the people in it were starting to lose faith in it as a force for good. And I believe the political process and government are both forces for good, properly, defining their role and so on, in partnership with others. Government can't do very much alone anymore. I think we figured that out. And so it was me sort of saying, well, what I always say to young people when I talk in schools and so on, which is, well, don't give up. If you have a strong view about something, if you want to change the world, then go about changing it. Don't just sit back and start complaining and saying, I can do nothing about that. I really believe people can change the world, even one person. We've seen countless examples of that. And so I thought, well, fine, if I feel this way about the race as it was shaping up between what was then Rob Ford and a continuation of the status quo, and Olivia Chow, which to me led to a different kind of polarization, but the same sort of general chaos. And if I really believed that I represented something different and that I sort of wanted to put that option in front of people, then I guess I had a choice. I had to run or not.
And what was it like for you? So now you're in, I guess we go into March, and there's some more videos that get surfaced, and Rob becomes the butt of all the late night American talk shows, and then Jimmy Kimmel invites him down there, and he gets down there in the black magic suit, and even Kimmel says, I'm glad you're here, but why are you here? I mean, it was that circus thing. I mean, it's nothing new, but I'm just trying to go back in your head. Well, as a candidate, were you looking and saying, this is good for me or this is bad for me?
You were sitting there, no, neither of the above, because what you were sitting there saying to yourself was, notwithstanding all of those incidents you mentioned, Rob Ford still sat at kind of high 20s in the polls, and I sat in the mid 20s, and none of that was moving very much. And you'd say to yourself, well, even with all of this going on and all these events, which I would only describe as being bad for the office of mayor and bad for the city, in my view, and that's not about Rob Ford personally, it's just about what was going on with his life and how he was.
No other politician has been able to survive this kind of stuff.
No. And so you're sitting there going, wow, like
all
this stuff happens. and I don't claim that my resume is perfect, but I look at it and it's a kind of fairly straightforward business and professional resume and political that just says, and I wasn't saying that meant they should be rushing to me, but I was just sort of mystified at this. And
I know. As a candidate,
but you had to believe in the end, and it comes from the beginning and it went right through to the last day, that people in the end, when they were given the choice between voting for more of the same or something a bit different and calmer and more, sort of steady and results focused, that they would vote for the latter, and they did. But
along the way, because this is a fascinating story. There's been no other year
for
like
me
it.
too.
Yeah. What was it like for Barb when all that was happening?
Well, she was great. I mean, she believes in me. I mean, she's my wife. So if you're down to the point where your wife doesn't believe in you anymore, then you shouldn't be running. But she believed in me, and she believed in what I represented and the option that I presented to people. And what she had to do with me was keep me on the track that I was on, perhaps differently than campaigns where I had been less successful. One was less is more. So we ran on a pretty straightforward message of this kind of persona that could be the leader of the city, and something like Smart Track, which was a very tangible one thing that really addressed the biggest issue. And secondly, that I had to make sure that at times I was tougher, than I had been, because by nature I'm a kind of consensual sort of person. And that at other times I didn't take the bait at all, when they were attacking me, because as I started to gain some strength, of course, the guns all started to turn on me in the summer. And as I got attacked, I had to be, and it's my nature anyway not to sort of get into a fist fight with people, because I figured they don't accomplish much. But it took some discipline in those debates to stand there when Doug Ford in particular would sort of impugn my character in every way that he thought he could, and just say, well, that's very interesting. Is that the best you've got? As opposed to saying, well, let's talk about you for a minute, and your mother wears army boots and this kind of thing. And I just didn't, it's not in my nature to want to engage in that, but I just didn't, because it was also not going to advance the interests of our campaign.
Well, speaking of that, I still want to come back to a couple of things before we're up to that, but part of his attack on you was this rich, silver-spooned elite who didn't need the money and just had too many friends and all that stuff. There's a whole segment of society who thinks a good, strong, wealthy businessman is exactly what politics needs, because presumably they got to be in it for the right reasons, as opposed to lining their pockets to get more wealth. What is your view of having a wealthy, well-connected business tycoon? Not that you're a tycoon in political
but I
office,
mean, I know
Bloomberg's
came from the background you came from. I mean, and my view is, first of all, you are who you are. But secondly, can you look possibly at some of these things as being glass half full instead of glass half empty, and saying, well, maybe if a person comes with a lot of business connections, a lot of business experience, they're going to do a better job managing the government more professionally. They're going to use the contacts and skills and experience they've had to get people involved in partnerships to get more things done and all this kind of thing. And maybe they'll bring a different approach than what we've seen from sort of career politicians and people like that. So but I couldn't change it anyway, and I couldn't change the way they characterized it. So all I had to do was say,
Did it hurt you?
well, John, I always think politicians who are asked that question and say, nope, doesn't hurt me, didn't matter at all, who cares? They're lying. Because anytime somebody tries to discredit your entire life and sort of say it's really actually quite worthless, and that you've never done anything worthy of any, of independently yourself and so on, of course that would when I say hurt your feelings, I don't want to sound like a crybaby, but you wouldn't find that encouraging to hear anybody say. But you also have to recognize it's politics. Some people want to play the game that way. I didn't, so I had to stand there and say, is that the best you've got? And you know what? I think most people, from what I would get on the feedback from the televised debates, when they would see me stand and look at him and say, is that all you've got? And do you have nothing to say about your own ideas for the city? Or even when I would compliment him and say, well, Doug, it's funny, your father gave you that business, but I admit you've built it up and you've created more jobs, and this is a great success story we should be trying to see replicated all over the place. He didn't know what to say, but I know from the feedback I got, the viewers were saying, well, good for you, because that's the way we should look at it. Doug Ford's success should be something you should be trying to replicate. My success should be something we should be trying to replicate and give every kid in the city a sense that they can be those different things in their careers, instead of trying to dump on people. It's a Canadian thing, that when people are successful, whether they're a hockey player or an authher or an actor or a politician, that we think, well, it's time to really bring them down to size. We can't have anybody being too successful in this country. So, I just, it is what it is, and the election turned out the way it did. And
speaking of thin skins or thick skins, though, I don't know anybody who's got a thicker skin than Rob Ford to have had to go through that rehab and public appearances before and after, and speak to those videos. I mean, absolutely incredible.
It is, and the illness, of course, on top of that.
Well, yeah.
And if you add to that, I mean, I've told the story a couple of times since the election of during the debates when he was still debating. He would actually stand at his podium when say Olivia or somebody else was speaking. There were still 5 candidates then, and he'd look at me and he'd point to his binder and he'd say, "The thing that's on this page of paper right here, I'm going to be putting that on you in a minute, and it's going to lay you out cold on the floor." He would. And he'd say, "Buddy," this way he talks, "Buddy, it's going to lay you out cold on the floor. You won't even be able to get up when I'm finished with you." And he'd smile at me, and I'd sort of say to him, "Well, bring it on, bring it on." This was what Christy Blatchford called the mystifying charm of Rob Ford, because there's something about him that, clearly it wasn't just the rhetoric. I mean, people sort of had a certain, but he does have thick skin and he does have resilience, and I just hope he gets better. I mean, I think everybody hopes that.
Does.
Everybody.
No, the years.
He says he's going to run again in 2018. Well, that's a long way away, and we'll see.
Yeah, no, it is, and you'll have your challenges between now and then. But you must have been somewhat concerned after he comes out of rehab about a possible redemption story or movement that takes place.
But I still believe, John, that in the end, people would say there was a leadership style there that was maybe made worse in terms of its impact by the personal issues. And I never talked about the personal issues as a broadcaster or as a politician, ever. But I still believe there was a leadership style there that people would say, you know what, for example, I would emphasize the fact that you're still going to have the same guy trying to deal with city council, which won't change that much. It'll be many of the same people back. So why do you think the result's going to be any better in terms of getting things done at City Hall? And so I still had the confidence that message was resonating, which I believe it did. You know, even when you substituted Doug Ford for Rob Ford, you'd say, well, really you're going to have the same leadership style. It's kind of a battering ram, you know, kind of a bull in a china shop sort of thing. And do you believe, based on what you've seen the last 4 years, that's going to work any better than the next 4? And I think that was a powerful argument in my favor, was that I was new to City Hall. I didn't have that style. I wanted to work with the City Council and the other governments, and that the Fords, plural, represented more of the same. And people sort of said, somehow, I don't think more of the same, even if we think he has mystifying charm, or if we think he's better and it's a great story of redemption. I don't think we want that anymore. And then in the end, they decided they didn't.
Were you surprised that Doug Ford stepped up to run?
No. Nick Kouvalis, my pollster, had told me this most amazing sort of account of what was going to happen in this race, and one of the things he said way back when was that there could be some kind of a switcheroo. Now, he didn't anticipate the illness, because who would? But I think it was always one of those things that everybody thought was a possibility, that if things weren't going well for Rob Ford because of the personal issues, that you'd push those to one side by simply having the other guy step in, say, well, he doesn't have the personal issues, but he's got the same platform. And so I was surprised. I mean, I wasn't as if I sort of said, yeah, it's going to happen on this day, but I wasn't completely surprised.
Well, you have the job now. How does it feel?
It feels good. I mean, like you are aware, it's a big difference, and anybody who's run for public office and then won would realize the difference between campaigning for it and thinking about it and actually then having it. It's sort of one of those deals where, you know, the day before I took the office, but after I'd won the election, I could go on the subway, and it was like about 2 days before I took office, the subway was screwed up, and I was on there one day. I take the subway every day to work, and the people are all kind of looking at me going, well, you know, I guess you're gonna have to deal with this in a couple of days. But they were still of that mode where it wasn't my deal yet.
Right.
Now, when I go on the subway, it hasn't yet, I mean, touch wood, it hasn't yet sort of had a breakdown while I've been there with people, but I think now they're gonna sort of say, well, over to you. And so, you know, you're aware of these responsibilities. You're aware of the magnitude of the challenges, which have no easy solutions. No. But that's why you want these jobs, because you can make a difference, you can move these things forward, and that's what you're there to do, and produce results.
But this job is different than most other political jobs, because you can't make it happen. You cannot make it happen as quickly as those people in the subway want you to make it happen, because you're dealing with this City of Toronto Act, this weak mayor system. You have a skill set to bring people together, but that takes a lot of work and a lot of time, as opposed to a prime minister or a premier who has a majority government and can make things happen quickly if they feel it's the right thing to do politically or otherwise.
Yeah.
What kind of patience do you think you have, given your business background, that can get stuff done quickly?
Well, it's a very good distinction you made, which is that I have great impatience for getting things done for people, but endless patience when it comes to, I mean, I knew what the rules were when I ran for this job.
Right.
So I knew that it wasn't something where you could come in and command party discipline to sort of just say that's the way it's going to be and we'll have it done by tomorrow afternoon. So if it takes more time, it'll take more time. But I also hope that I can instill a greater sense of urgency a little bit, so that even whether it's the public servants or the politicians can just speed up the way we try and move things through the system, because there's many, many things on which there's not a huge debate. Everybody would sort of agree that's what we want to do, and you need to have a bit of a discussion of how to do it, but there's endless amounts of time spent studying things and reporting on things. And if we can try and condense that a bit and just get things moving a bit faster, the system is what it is. And so I ran knowing what the system was. And
but does the mayor have the authority to get all that stuff done faster, the studies and everything?
Well, what you have is you have the mandate to be able to kind of say, look, I got elected to do some stuff about traffic here and transit. And so I can say to you already that I've gone and sort of looked at small things that people see going on, like the opening of all the doors on the streetcars to speed it up, and it will make a big difference. Mm-hmm. And they said they were already studying it, but I said, well, could you study it a bit faster so we could actually do it? And yes, I have the authority to say that and to sort of say, let's do this faster. And I can see already it makes a difference when there's somebody who just says that. Could we please find a way, instead of doing this in 6 months, to do it in 6 weeks? And guess what? You've got a very professional public service. They find a way to do it in 6 weeks most of the time. And that benefits the public. And it addresses my own impatience.
Well, maybe I should ask you 3 years from now whether or not you're advocating for a stronger mayoral system.
I hope you will.
Changes for the
I think blaming the rules, though, is the wrong approach with these things. I mean, if you look at
the question of blaming, would it be more efficient?
I don't know, but if you look at the Eggletons and the Crombies, and it was under a slightly different system, admittedly, the Halls of the world, they got a lot of stuff done with the rules kind of as they are. And so it's more a matter of your determination and your will to work with others and to sort of, forge that coalition you need to get things done. And they all got lots done. David Miller did, Mel Lastman did. David Miller and Mel Lastman are operating under almost exactly the same rules, if not worse than I have. So,
what did the Prime Minister tell you about Smart Track last week? Share with us what you haven't so far.
Well, it was one of those things where he wasn't telling me much, I was telling him more about it, because unlike politicians, say even sort of a Premier Kathleen Wynne, she lives here, so she sort of absorbed more of the debate of the election and would know more about Smart Track, and it was also part of her own policy to have this regional express rail, which is really where Smart Track came from. In Mr. Harper's case, he doesn't live that existence. Toronto's public transportation problems are not the only thing that he has on his mind running the whole country. So I was going through the concept with him, how it would address what I believe to be the number one issue in the region, which is traffic and transportation, and how it would also benefit the economy, for example, over which he does have the principal responsibility. And so it was me more explaining what Smart Track was and why it would make a positive difference to him. And because it was the first time we'd sat down and talked about Smart Track. So it was a very good first meeting in that respect, and I guess we'll see how the universe unfolds.
Well, I was just going to ask you, without sounding political, is there any way you can get an inclination as to whether or not he'd like to buy into this? Maybe
no, I wouldn't go so far as to do that. I mean, I can only say he's very interested in the issues of public transportation and the economy and traffic, because he knows, from even just being here.
But is it also too trite for me to suggest he has an election coming up and he needs a lot of support in the GTA that might make sense for him to...
Well, you know what, John? Whatever it is that might convince him to sign up to Smart Track and other transit initiatives I never sort of analyze people's reasons for signing up. I just think this is a good project for Toronto and for the GTA. My principal concern is Toronto. I think our federal government should be a continuous participant in public transportation investment in the Toronto area and other major cities. And I hope, for whatever series of reasons, he reaches the same conclusion. But, it's a complicated world, and he's got a big job to do, and so do I. But I'll be doing my very best to persuade him that he should become a part of this, because I think it's going to be good for Canada.
Before we leave Smart Track, I don't mean for you to go into great depth, but you started off the campaign talking about that downtown relief line, then took a little bit...
I called it a Yonge Street relief line, which Smart Track is.
Okay. I'm not trying to nail you for anything. It seemed as though that there was this big switch. Your opponents were at least saying, from the downtown relief line to Smart Track, it seemed like it was a little bit into the campaign before Smart Track took shape.
Because it took us time to develop the idea, but what I asked for, so that the listeners and viewers will know,
right.
I asked for a list of transit options in order of what would bring the most relief to the greatest number of people on the most cost-effective basis, the fastest.
Sure.
And of course, when you actually looked at them all, I mean, Smart Track, because it was using existing GO train tracks for the in the main, and could therefore be done in 7 years, was something that was unlike all the other projects because it had that shorter time frame. And I am seized with a sense of urgency about the traffic and transit situation in Toronto, such that it immediately was at the top of my list, and I picked it. But then it took us time to work up the idea in the context of presenting it to the public on May 27th, which is when we did it. So you're right, it took a little while to do that, but we'd gone through this process earlier of picking an option to run on that we thought was the one that was going to be best for Toronto.
Well, the only piece of it that is not as obvious as what you see on paper is the funding formula. You still remain confident that this funding formula can be in place? And
you know why? It's principally grounded in my optimism of two dots that are connected. One, the continued growth of Toronto, and there's not a soul, not one soul in any political party anywhere who doesn't agree that Toronto is going to have its population increase by millions over the next number of years. Millions, 100,000 every year. And therefore that carries with it the prospect of future development, i.e. simply places for those people to live and work. Because we better have jobs for them and places for them to live, or we're in deep trouble. And so the transit will help make that happen. You know, transit begets development, and development begets transit. And so I think what you're going to find is that connection that exists. It's not an accident that if you look up Yonge Street when you're flying into Toronto, you see all the development that's followed the subway. And so I just think that I'm confident this is going to work, and we're going to make it work, and it's a smart way to go about this.
Speaking of development, I don't know if you've had much time to think about it, but I've had more than one person say to me, Toronto is really behind the times and other jurisdictions when it comes to development fees, that there's a lot of money that can be generated by the City of Toronto by increasing the development fees in comparison to what I'm told Mississauga and Vaughan and even to the east is in some cases almost half of what these other jurisdictions.
Now the latter comparison you just made is true. Ours are less than those municipalities. But the other reality that people don't realize is that we're right in the middle of a phased-in increase in development fees right now, and so that increase hasn't even been absorbed yet, let alone talking about future ones. And it's a fine balance you have to achieve at any point in time between making sure you obviously make sure that you get the money from development fees to pay for transit and for hydro and for sewers and all that sort of thing, but that you also don't stifle the growth and progress of the city. So it's one of those things where they're in the middle of being increased right now, and so
okay, great. I'm just passing on anecdotally.
No, I hear it often myself.
I've got a couple of development friends who say to me, you know what, John, I really wouldn't have said this 20 years ago, but I've already made my gazillion billions. You guys are really not charging me very much money. I've already got my money, so goodbye. But
not too many of them say that publicly.
No, they won't. And I know that they fund campaigns of politicians and everything else, but they're telling me across the kitchen table that they're paying the costs in Toronto to build are the same.
They're lesser.
They're lesser. Yeah. So he said, our cement costs don't change, our wood costs don't change.
No, and our transit costs as a city government and our sewer costs and our hydro costs actually are no less than they really are in Mississauga. Yeah, right. So as a result, you can have that discussion, but as I say, we're in the middle of phasing in increases now on those, and so, get that done and then see where things are.
Let's look forward to a couple of highlights. First of all, I guess Pan Am Games this year is going to be...
we have to make it work, too. When I say that, I mean, this is a big event. It's the first sort of big multi-sport international thing we've done in Toronto. We've tried to bid for the Olympics and so on. And I think it's important to the psychology of the city, not for future reference in terms of anything else we've been on, just when we put something on, if we're saying we're a great city, then we should put this on properly. And properly means with enthusiasm and professionally. And so I'll be certainly wanting to sort of lead the cheering for it. Yes, I mean, whatever the problems have been, lead the cheering for it, encourage people to participate in it actively to make sure it's a success for our reputation internationally, but also for our own self-respect. We are a great city. We have to prove that, because great cities rise to the challenge of putting on great events like this and not treating it as second rate, which it isn't. Saying it's a great event, it's an international event, it's an important event, and we're going to make a success of it.
Well, some people don't even, I'm not being critical, but some people don't even see it as an international event. Share with them very briefly, for those who
41
don't compare it to Olympic Games.
41 countries, a bigger number of athletes than would come for an Olympic Games, a larger number of events than Olympic Games. And these are countries that are not unimportant to us. I mean, I don't want to diminish, Barbados, which is important because there's probably a lot of people from Barbados that live in Toronto, but Mexico, Colombia, Venezuela, Brazil, these are big present and future trading partners of ours, places from which we're getting increasing numbers of immigrants from South America, say. And so I think it's important that we do this properly. We bid on it. Everybody was enthused when we bid. They were excited when we won. Well, now let's carry it off and do it properly. And I think we will. I think it'll be a big success. But I think we have to, there's always naysayers around. And I think we just have to say to those naysayers, look, you know what, you go in someplace and have your naysaying. We're going to make this a success and make Toronto proud and make the world proud of Toronto.
Well, I hope we talk a couple of times throughout the year. I hope you remain as accessible as you have been throughout your business life. And
the worst day you have when you have some troubles going on, because in these kinds of jobs you're going to have days when there's troubles, difficulties and so on. That's the day when you should be talking to the media, because you want to get your own side of the story.
I hope you remember that the next time I call you at 5 o'clock in the morning.
I will.
Home
well, 5 o'clock.
Or try to reach you.
I'm actually up there.
You're up.
So
that's
it's only
late for you.
Others in the house that are sleeping.
I know, but I have to apologize to your communication staff as well, because some of us have...
Well, at least you're up at 5 o'clock.
We need the news.
Other people are still sleeping then. Yeah, anyway, sleep when you're dead.
Best of the season to you.
Thank you, and to you and to everybody at the whole Rogers Broadcasting 680 organization, which I have fond memories of them most of the time. Most of those 5 o'clock in the morning calls were okay. All the best. You too.